So this follows up the earlier session on identifying trends. We're now moving on to applying trends. And I'm sure everyone found it a great session involving Bill Grable and Bob Rosing. And Francis has kindly agreed to join the start of this session at least, to provide the link, because in case some of you weren't in the earlier session, we're going to start with Francis giving a brief summary of the key points to emerge, and then our other speakers, and they'll introduce themselves in a moment, will be looking at how they see things in terms of, are any of these identified trends being put into practice in Europe and in Asia? And in fact, do we have a completely different perspective on trends from a European and Asian perspective? But first, I'll ask Francis to give a brief summary of what went on in the last session. What has been identified?
Okay, well, I do apologize to those of you who were here because you're going to hear things again. But nonetheless, it's quite interesting, I think, to tease out some of the major issues which have transpired over the course of the last couple of days and in the last session with Bill and Bob. First of all, what's been coming to me, and indeed to everybody who's been in the various breakout groups, is the issues of commoditization without standardization, which is, of course, problematic, oversupply, price pressure downwards, although for DSPs in particular, although they're receiving less and prices are on a downward spiral, wage costs and all the rest of it are on the up. People wanting greater speed of delivery, in fact, people wanting things in real time, smaller scopes of work, scope creep, the issue of lump sum, which of course may well demand and is a problem, but also an opportunity, a remix of product services, a rearrangement, a rebundling of services. So instead of giving people table d'hôte, you can give people a la carte, mass customization in that case, and then a systemic underinvestment in technology in this business. That's been identified by key leaders. Now, some of the themes emerging from my discussion with Bob Rosen and Bill Graber is that we are going to have to look at the issues in the business with a degree more curiosity. There's no point just whinging that things aren't good. Look curiously at what's going on in this industry and look with curiosity at what's going on outside this industry to see who's making the money, follow the money, what's happening with the people who have the money and how they're making it. Find the pain points. Don't just be giving people a service that you think that they necessarily want. I think I'm speaking to the converted here, but finding the pain point is the basis of all innovation. If you can find a pain point, something that cheeses people off, aggravates people, and you can deal with it, you have got something you can sell them. Also, think of unmet needs. We've been talking about the gig economy. We've been talking about project-based workers, people who will not have a pension, don't have security, don't get moved around with all the help that people in a big industry get. So those are going to be possible areas where you might innovate and find new products, new services. Very interesting. There's something else, and I don't want to steal somebody else's thunder here, but this business of, I mean, it's a meta trend, and it's something I'm massively interested in, the issue of longevity, which I mentioned in my keynote speech the other day, a lifetime ago. And the issue of increased life expectancy. So we're living longer, but fewer births, a dropping birth rate. So instead of having a population pyramid, we're now having a population cube almost. What does that mean for the labor force? What does that mean for the kind of people who will be working in the short and medium term? So these are some of the key issues that emerged, I think, from our discussions over the last couple of days, and specifically some of the issues that emerged in terms of trends in the last session.
Thank you, Francis. So to kick off, looking at how we're applying these trends and what other trends are emerging, we're going to start with technology and over to Simon Johnson. Thanks, Simon.
Here you go. Good luck.
Well, good morning. So I was asked to come and have a chat about technology, but what I thought I would do is just give you a personal journey. What we did, what was a problem we were trying to address, what was the pain, what do we do about it? What did we get right, but also what we got wrong? So I'm going to try and be as reasonably transparent as I can and show you what we've actually done in technology. So those who Don't know anything about our platform. I will give a quick overview on it, but I'm not going to go into huge detail about it. But what I'm going to talk about is actually the initial point, is what is it that technology needs to do? Now, I think as far as we are concerned, all of us in this room need to deliver excellence in these three circles. So we have assignee experience, fine. We do that at the moment with telephone. We do that very well with face-to-face. But how can technology help us on that journey? So we looked at what we had at the time and said, do we have a good experience here with technology? And the answer was, not really, a bit fragmented, really. So we then looked at the second thing, finance and reporting, and said, right, do we have the good technology to give us that as well? And when I'm talking about finance and reporting, I'm talking about real-time, on-the-spot, ideal reporting. So we looked at what we had and went, honestly, it's not very good either, frankly. So we then moved on to the third, which is corporate objectives. Now, this is actually not just what our corporate clients want us to do, but what the RMCs or any of our DSPs around the world want us to do, making sure we're hitting their targets. So we looked at that and said, to be honest with you, I don't think it's very good either. So this was about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. We went, you know what, we're going to have to rethink this. So I then started becoming basically an IT magpie. I started collecting IT systems like you wouldn't believe. And I actually ended up with about 11 different systems, which was interesting. And I was talking to a company about bringing in IT system number 12. And I actually sat there and went, you know what, I think I might be slightly off beam here. And what we were doing is we were just bringing anything that looked shiny and helpful for a particular issue. And we found that we're becoming massively ineffective. Our productivity was dropping, our efficiency was dropping, and first and foremost, technology should be making these things better. So we were, sort of simplistically, putting data into one system, getting it out, and then manually then putting it into the next system, getting it out, and so on and so forth repeatedly. I thought, this is ridiculous. So about 2.5 years ago, we decided to actually step back, and we actually got rid of almost all our systems, and we now just have 3. And that's what the bubble diagram at the end is. So I'm not going to explain what the system does. If anybody wants to talk about it, be my guest, because it's my favorite conversation. But I'm not going to. So one thing which I was going to actually explain before we actually go into it is that continual learning is something that a lot of people have been talking about. So I've actually went back to university this year, which was an interesting experience. But during one of the lectures, we had this dean of technology, or whatever his job title was, and he came up and he was doing his lecture about technology, where it's going, what's good, what's bad. Fascinating. And he stopped for a second and he said, well, I don't know what all you guys do for a living, but what I would recommend to you is, goodness sake, don't build your own IT system. Which was slightly awkward because I was actually in the process of drafting up my paper, basically, on technology and relocation. So thankfully, he carried on talking. He actually then said, unless you've got a very clear and precise goal, if you know exactly what you're trying to do, then fine. If you don't, stop and rethink. So let me just sort of walk you through what we did, what we got right, and also what we got wrong. So what we have at the end here is a client can actually link into our system MoveWise. It's a case management system. Now, there's nothing very rocket science about that, but what we looked at was the efficiency model. So we needed to make sure that everybody who is providing the service lived in the case management system. I mean, physically lived in it. So we looked at all the key services, and I'm going to come back to one in more detail. And actually said, well, the home search aspect has got to be delivered in there. And the number one goal is we must be aiming to touch data just once. That was the aim. Ideally, not even once, if we can get away with it. But we should just touch it once, and it should be everywhere. So we then lived in the case management system and actually had the house hunt bit. That was fine. We then moved on to the business traveler, or the self-managed part, or the lump sum bit, depending what name you want to give it. Now, this is where, frankly, we got it wrong. I'll openly admit this. Because we actually sat with one of our clients who had a precise need, and they said, this is what we want. And we sat and listened to them and said, okay, so tell me more detail, what do you want? We listened to what they want and went, fine, we'll build that for you. And that's exactly what we did. Huge mistake. What we didn't do is actually dig down to find out what the real pain was. So we provided a fantastic system. Took us about 6 odd months to build it. It cost us a small fortune. We sit there thinking, so proud. Look at this. We pressed the button to switch it on, expecting fanfares and sort of fireworks to go off. And they went, it's all right. Which was a little bit underwhelming. And about 6 months later, they actually sat with us and went, you know what, it's very nice, but it's not what we want. So we actually had to stop again, and we had to drill right down to see what the actual issue was. What was the pain? And once we worked out what the pain was, we then rebuilt it again. That was in the autumn last year, and we relaunched it again in February this year, and we're absolutely back on track. So this is about, with technology, if you're going to start investing in playing with it, to be absolutely clear what it is you want to do. So we then thought, okay, how can we make this more efficient as well? And this is a journey, so we haven't finished all this, but it's pretty much there. So all the systems are in there, and we only looked at the wonderful world of API. Now, API is still relatively new to me, but we've gone live with one of our clients. Now, I think this is probably the single most exciting thing. In fact, there was somebody in this conference who said it to me. I'm going to steal it because it makes me look more intelligent. But he actually said that in a few years' time, API will be as interesting as saying you've got an email address. And I thought that was actually quite insightful, because what he was implying is that all of us are experts in our area. Now, if we can actually get in a situation where we have rich data, and I think this was one of the early ones talking about, and we can actually share that data in real time to people, now that's amazing, and that's super cool. So we're looking to try and do this. So all the services one space, and it's linked into something called DocuWare, which I would love to take credit for, but I can't. It's a German software company. It's a digital filing system. Now, many of you might be familiar with this. If you are, that's wonderful. If you're not, then basically what it does is every email goes into this. Every invoice, every piece of document we produce, everything lives in there. If it's a document, it lives in DocuWare. If it's data, it lives in MoveWise. And what it allows us to do is be able to actually access the information from any which way we want. Also, this is actually an intelligent system, and it talks to our accounts package. So you might be familiar with this. So you can teach it how to read a document. So the first time it sees, I don't know, electricity bill, you can actually say that this is the address, this is the amount, this is the VAT, whatever. And then the second time it sees it, it goes, oh, seen this before. And it tries to pull the data out. The third time it goes, got it, and off you go. So you can just scan information in, and this information then goes off to wherever you want it to go. In this particular occasion, into our finance system. So our finance system gets it and goes, oh, bill to pay, and asks for authorization from the person who's actually responsible for it. Now, the end result is we have actually moved to a position where we are now reasonably contained. We have made numerous mistakes, more than I actually probably want to admit to up here, but if anybody wants to drill me on this, I will say it. But I think the general view is it doesn't matter if you're building your own system or you're buying a system. It really doesn't matter. The issue is to make sure that you know what you want to do with it. I mean, really, really know what you want to do with it. Make sure you're on trend, because now we can actually make sure we have the data to tell people what's going on in real time. So we can show what's happening in the UK, we can show what's happening in the housing market, we can show where people are moving, we can show where the trends are, we can see whether people are actually going where they say they want to go. We can actually make sure that we sit with clients and go, you know what, you're putting a budget on this area, nobody goes there, they go over here. We can show what the trends are in regard to the rents, etc., and we can feed that back and offer cost savings and efficiencies back to our clients. So does it actually make us money? Yeah, probably it does, but because some clients use us because of it. But the key thing is efficiency. We actually reckon, well, the team does, because they did their own research on this, it saves them about 2 to 2.5 hours a day per person by actually having the systems straight. So it's taken us 2 years to get there, but 2.5 hours extra per person per day, that's fantastic. I mean, let's be honest, fees aren't exactly going up. So the way we can actually deal with this is by making ourselves super, super efficient. So that is very simplistically where we're going with it. As I said, it's a journey. We've probably got another 2 years or so to go before we finish the whole thing. But it is exciting. I love it. I found my inner geek, which is nice. But that's the sort of implementation of the trend. Okay.
Thanks, Simon. That was terrific. What a great overview of the IT journey and following the IT trend in this context. Now, Adrian Leach is now going to look at a different trend, a different set of trends. It's really difficult to describe what he's going to talk about because I've seen his slides and I think it will be illuminating. So over to Adrian.
Don't be so worried. Simon, let me give you back. It is. Well, good morning, everybody. Lovely to be here. Fascinating session, I thought, this morning. I've got quite a number of slides. My colleagues have only got 2 each. The reason I've got a large number of slides is because I have a memory of a snail, and I need the slides to remind me of what I'm here to tell you about. Because I've been asked to talk about compliance. And often we think about compliance, and the trends of compliance is somebody cracking a whip that we have got to comply. And I thought, well, you know, I can talk about contracts and vicarious liability and duty of care and all the things that came up earlier. But I thought I'd maybe concentrate a little bit on the human aspect of compliance. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start off at a very unusual place, at least I think it's unusual, and I'd like to ask for your opinion. So how many children will there be in the year 2100? Will there be A, 4 billion children, B, 3 billion children, or C, 2 billion children? Excuse me. In 1950, as it says, there were just 1 billion. In 2000, there were 2 billion. So out here, let's have some hands raised for A, if you think it's going to be 4 billion. Who thinks it's going to be 4 billion? One person, 2 people. So you don't think it's going to be 4 billion. What about 3 billion? A lot more hands. Okay. And 2 billion. What an intellectual audience this is. Because the answer is, congratulations, 2 billion. Everybody thinks when we look at data that there's a straight line. There's a huge population out there and it's growing, and I'll explain that a bit more later on. And out of that population, they must all be having babies, lots of babies, and Francis touched on this earlier. But they're not. The most extraordinary thing has happened in my lifetime, in fact in the last 35 years. The woman, or a woman, in the world in 1965 had on average over 5 babies. Now, here we are 35 years later, it's under 2.5 children. This is a mega trend, and it does have relevance to what we're talking about. So what's caused this most dramatic of decreases in the birth rate to see that? It is an outstanding graph. Well, actually, it is based on this. In our world, we often believe in our world that actually it's a terrible place and it's going to the pot, and it's not like it was 20 years ago. But actually, in 1800, 85% of people lived on the equivalent of less than $2 a day. Less than $2 a day. So to give you an idea of that level of income, they don't have a house, they don't have regular food, they have no access to education, they have no sanitation. The water that they drink, they probably had to travel a considerable distance to get, and unfortunately it probably has the feces of a neighbour drifting through it. That's what it was like in the 1800s on the whole. Here we are in 2019, well, I think this was data from 2016, less than 9% of the world are now in extreme poverty. You probably might not have believed that had you been told it, because we are in a changing world. Natural disasters, deaths trend has halved in the last 100 years. So people who die from floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, all of those nasty disasters has been halved because we've put in systems that we all comply with. This was another one which I thought was amazing. 80% of the world's 1-year-olds has been vaccinated against measles. I realise in America at the moment there's a slight trend to go the opposite direction, and I'm hoping that's a blip. I mean, it's amazing again to think in my lifetime they've eradicated smallpox. 80% of the adults in the world today are literate. Again, what a phenomenal figure. You'd never have believed it. It's a trend. In fact, 80% of households on this planet have access to electricity. Again, you listen to the news, for example, you'd never believe that. And Francis touched on this earlier, but was talking more about the USA. The average life expectancy of birth now, so the children being born now, will be 72. It was just 31 in 200 years ago. So all of these changes in this world have created a situation where women don't need to bear so many babies in order to have some survive to do the child labour for them and to give them the income they need as they're older people. So what I've done with this is I've tried to demonstrate to you in a very mega trend way that you have to have critical thinking. You have to examine the data. Excuse me, I've seen to so many people here. Somebody's very kindly given me a cold. And so examining this data, this sense of what is going on around you, you can then get some idea on where compliance comes in and what you can try and do to try and measure how you can react to it. So here's another trend, and I'm going to ask you again to help vote. Do we think, having read this, by 2100 again, the population will increase by 4 billion to 11.6 from the current 7.6 billion? And by the way, it's increased 3 billion people on this planet in my lifetime. And I'm not responsible. There's only 2 of them I'm responsible for. So here's this population growth. What's the main reason for it? Is it A, more children? I think I gave you the answer earlier. B, more adults? Or C, are there going to be more elderly people out there? So I'm not going to ask you on A, because if you stick your hand up for that, you're not listening earlier. So perhaps you can tell me whether or not you think it's B with your hand up, please. Okay. And C, more elderly. Okay. Well, this lady here who was on her own right at the front is the only person who was right. There are going to be more adults. Children are plateauing, but people who are over the age of 75, no. Our population will plateau at 11.6 billion in 3 generations' time. All very interesting. But why am I sharing this with you? Well, elder power, adult power, had a big impact on a man-made disaster we had in the UK. We call it Brexit. It's not one that we could easily deal with. You can probably see the 65 plus range. This is going back to 2016, of course, because we can't make our minds up on whether or not to do it. 64% said they'd like to leave, the 65-year-olds. The youngsters, 71% wanted to remain. Those 65-year-olds are now 68-year-olds or dead. The 15-year-olds are now 18 and want to try and leave and stay. In this instance, this aging demographic had a big impact. And if our Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, when he was busy calling this, had just thought about it a bit, perhaps we might not have been in this situation based on the demographics. Understanding the trends, perhaps he didn't do very well. So here we have more adults. Some of these trends were identified earlier. Longer working life means later retirement. In the UK, it is later retirement already, and that's likely to carry on going that way. People expect a better work-life balance. When I started years ago, and I worked at a ferry port in Portsmouth, and it wasn't unusual for me to work 24, 36 hours non-stop. Now, people want to go home, bang on 5:30, unless they have a job and they're willing to stay behind to deal with something. They want a work-life balance. In fact, I'm hearing from my daughter that her company is moving to a 4-day working week. Extend the working hours between Monday and Thursday and have a 3-day weekend. It's another trend that's happening as people get older. And older assignees probably mean older parents, and you'll see the relevance for that shortly. The fact is, societies are maturing, and that's exactly what we want. They're de-risking the way they work, and everything about it is then coming back to compliance. Because if people are living in a safer world, they'll put in more laws and rules and regulations to make it happen. When those rules and regulations are breached, consider the ramifications. So Boeing built the 737 MAX 8. And unfortunately, there have been 2 plane crashes. They've had to ground their fleet, and the trust in that company has suffered through the share price. Volkswagen had this emissions scandal, and that caused for itself a lack of trust, and people were concerned by it. When we put in compliance, we expect that compliance to be adhered to, and we live on that trust. Compliance creates complexity. And the point I wanted to make with this slide is that actually we ought to take on board compliance as an extremely important part of our industry. In, excuse me, in, when was it, 1517, this man, this Franciscan monk, Luca Piccoli, and I apologize to the Italians in the audience for mangling his name, this man invented or published double-entry bookkeeping for accountants. Now, why is that important? Well, it went on to create accountancy. And accountancy has got high barriers to entry, high qualifications are required to be in it. The professionals who are in it are highly respected, and generally, I mean, we ignore Arthur Anderson at this stage, and these people all can create a living and have a margin associated with it. It's something that this industry absolutely needs to do. I would suggest to you that we need to actually embrace compliance. It might be a tiger, but it is absolutely worth embracing. And then use all the qualifications that we can gain to try and make sense out of it and create a value for ourselves. However, the accountants took 500 years to get to that point. We don't have 500 years. So in the meanwhile, at my company, what we're trying to do is diversify as quickly as we can do. Many, many income streams that are coming in that will help us, no reliance on one particular area. So what we've done is come up with different products and different services, and I'm just going to quickly explain them to you in a spirit of openness so you know what we're doing. Bridgefast and Time for Care are elder care services. We help relocate the elderly, we help sell their properties for them, and we help them find nursing homes because often the families have no idea where to take somebody, and it's a critical part of their lives. We've invested in a portal called RentRight. Not the most successful portal because it's quite a monopoly really in the UK, but nonetheless, we hope that it's got necessary legs and it's an investment that we're trying to make work. We invest in corporate housing with this service called Mitas, and I'll happily explain to you a lot more about it another day, but it's trying to disrupt the traditional rental market. In the top there, we've done universities, residence halls in a university with all these students. Perhaps not the best thing we could have done, and it was quite an interesting experience looking after students in halls of residence. And then this last one is that we've taken our housing knowledge and we've moved into the public sector. And by going into the public sector, we're working with our local authorities, our councils, to house the homeless and those in temporary accommodation. And I'm hoping that fairly shortly we're about to sign a 40-year deal to manage properties. And that sort of annuity income is something that in this industry I'm sure we would all welcome. It's doing something different with the information that we have to hand and analysing that information. So look at the real data carefully would be the message I leave with you. I think compliance is absolutely essential for our existence and we need to actually embrace it. And my other piece of advice, if I can give you any, is diversify. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. That was an absolutely unique take on compliance and makes my legal compliance talk seem very dull by comparison. So I'll be stealing some of your slides. That was fascinating. Just in passing, one thought is that it also demonstrates that trends are not necessarily global. And I'm thinking, for example, of working week, working hours, or maybe quite distinct trends between Europe and North America, for example. Even in my area, of course, in data protection, where the rights of privacy are being given far greater precedence in Europe than perhaps in North America, and that's driving a lot of our compliance laws. But we're now going to get an Asian perspective on things, so over to Kay.
Thank you, gentlemen, and some lively conversation. I'm going to take a context from Asia and to give you a perspective of the group of companies that I have the honor of managing. We are in true Asia. So for the furthest, being Myanmar on the west, through Japan, down through Indonesia, Philippines, up into China and Mongolia. And with those, the diversity of cultures, the difference in business needs, the difference as I look to the ethnicities and also gender, and the perspective of family, as well as the perspective of business, all right? So I did a scan with our team, and in terms of what I'll be covering, and I'm not going to do these in 3 bullets. I'm going to weave it through the conversation of the points that I'll address. What's different, what's new, and what's next. And a lot of what's different is actually re-engineered from our past because we know our past and we keep creating our pasts into our futures. We also have our blind spots, and in our industry, as we scan in relocation and what we're doing and how we're doing it, our organization comes from a DNA of moving services. We added in the visa migration and the destination services. We operate from that lens. We may not be a technology company. We need to embrace it. We need to leverage it. We need to be courageous. We need to be fearless. We need to be afraid, but not in a fear that will lock us into a position. But we need to have that lens to be able to look at all of the things that are going on, as whether it's the megatrends, the metatrends, the minor things that are going on, or what's occurring in our own lifetime, to be able to take those experiences and learning, the curiosity that you referenced, and be inquisitive of how we could apply things differently so that we can transform. So I'll give you a little bit of my history. I didn't grow up in the relocation industry. I have moved all of my life. From the time I was 2 years old, I have never lived in a house more than 4 years. My next physical move, I have my silver anniversary. It'll be my 25th house that I'll live in. 13 of those have crossed borders. You may listen to my accent and say I sound perhaps an aspiring American. I'm a British passport holder. My DNA, my parents are British. I was born in Canada. I've lived in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. I've lived in Asia. And I tend to be a ping pong between North America and Asia. With that, it's given me a lens and a perspective that's my lens of somebody that relocates quite frequently. I think it's extraordinarily awesome, somebody who's lived in the house that they were born in. I don't know how they could do that, because it's not my experience. So if I take that context and think about that and how we do our business, I don't know what I don't know, because I don't know I even don't know it, because it's a totally a thing that I don't know. So being able to draw on those reflections. So if I go back in my business life, I did not come from the relocation industry. It was a totally different industry. And if I said to you more than 25 years ago, I was in the printing industry. And the printing industry at that point in time, and the business that we had, no longer exists. There were individuals, this was before you had the computers, and I can remember the Osborne computer that you would carry and lug, and the data isn't even on the smallest of chips that you have. We had team members, and they were called strippers. They did not take their clothes off. These were individuals with acetate of putting the 4 colors together to go onto a printing press. And this was the business that had been, if you go back to the typesetters, right, that took the little letters and put them into place. We don't do it the same anymore. And what I recognized, while I chose, this is where I met my husband, this is where I actually said to him, fire me, because I do not see the vision. And he said, I can't, you're my wife. I chose to leave that industry because I recognized the transformation and who we were at that point in time. The segment of the business we weren't going to be able to transform. We needed to innovate or die. And what I recognized, one of the printing companies that we would go on print runs and do all of their work, and it was a family business. He embraced the technology to leverage the capabilities and the alternatives. He was fearful for what his future would be, but he recognized that there was an opportunity to do something different. He is one of the only printers that is still in business in that market that I am aware of that I interacted with. The others were so frozen in the way that they had been doing things that they didn't embrace the future with the courageous fearlessness that they needed. They didn't ask those curious, inquisitive questions, and they just went away. They don't exist in that realm anymore. The strippers are just a conversation. The technology is transformed. It's on everybody's device. I probably could be doing the same work from my mobile device now that it took teams of people to do. But we still have printing. We may have it in a virtual world. Look at the amount of paper that we still have, that we hold on to as being our future. So if I talk about technology, we still need human beings in this. We need to leverage it. We need to be listening to what the needs are. And I think that's really where, and Simon, your comment that you created something, which I've done so many times in my life, where we thought it was the next nirvana, it was the best thing. And you rolled it out and it's like, so what? Or wow, that was a waste of time and money and resources. And the worst thing that we could do as our relocation community is not looking at what's different, what's new, and what's next, is really the collaborative efforts and energy that we have through Eura, that we have through the conversation with each other. We have so many opportunities to transform our sectors, to learn. Some of you have chosen university. Some of us have chosen life and the other avenues that we have. But we really need to be listening, scanning, and how we internalize it. So as I look at our technology, if I look to what we do in Asian Tigers and what we do in Asia, one of the first team members I hired, I love her to bits, but she's no longer on my team. We've put her into another team. When we were implementing the technology, she came to me one day and she said, "Okay, you've got to stop using this technology. You do know that the Chinese invented the pencil and the paper. It's so important we keep this." And I went, "Okay, got it." And she couldn't embrace the changes that needed to occur. It didn't mean that she was no longer relevant in our organization. It was identifying the individuals we needed to transform so that we could become different for what was going to be new and next for us, right? So I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. As I scanned with our team of what was happening in Asia, cost control, lump sum, we've heard a lot about it. We've had an interesting phenomenon at Asian Tigers, which does not meet with what we're seeing in this. We do see that there's changes. We're always being asked to reduce our prices, or what could you do differently? Quality is a given. Price isn't expected that it's going to go down, but our costs are going up. But we've had a client mix that has actually driven higher services. And we've actually had an increment in revenue on the same book of business that we had, because we chose to differentiate in some of the things we were doing and asking and listening to what the customer needed. And a few other presenters earlier in the Eura sessions had referenced about, okay, we may have been doing it this way with a service model or a package, but now we have these other extraordinary indulgent items, whether it's for VIPs or it's you wanted to have an extra phone call or you need something extra that we've chosen to monetize that's added value. It hasn't marginalized our business, and it's met our clients' needs. I don't want to be pushing sausages out when they didn't want sausages. They wanted something different. As I look at the complexities of immigration, you know, on the larger theme, many governments are very protectionist, especially in Asia. There's a huge shift of compliance. Many of our Asian countries are looking to have online systems. You know, in a group of countries, if I go back to the geography map, You know, Myanmar is, in many of the scans, the most opaque country globally and has the greatest challenge to move itself up in terms of compliance, whether it's on regulatory or the bribery elements or all of those pieces. That doesn't mean that we should lean out. We actually all need to lean in to support the transformation that's occurring. I also recognize, and many of you may not be aware of this, of what the ASEAN, ASEAN communities are doing with their AEC 2025 monitoring and evaluation. It's called M&E framework. And this is their ministers voted on it in 2016 in August. And this is an initiative to bring the ASEAN countries into a global compliance perspective. And I anticipate some of the regulatory points that they will bring forward would be at a higher level than what you're experiencing in the EU, whether it's related to GDPR or compliance. Many are just not aware of what that occurrence is. 2025 is not very far away. It sounds like a long way because it's got a different number from we're in the 19 to 25. As I look to and for our organization, we recognize in the moving side, fine, we've got regulatory compliance. We have contractual compliance with everybody that we work with, but we needed to embrace behavioral compliance, especially as I look at our footprint of countries. We needed to make a difference where we would put our hand up and say, no, I'm sorry, this is the way we need to do it, because in our accountability to each of you as partners, we needed to recognize what we needed to do. It might slow down the visa migration process, it might slow down the household goods, it might have a shift on the destination services timing, but we need to be who we need to be, and we need to bring that forward and educate, again, with a level of curiosity for many. Duty of care. Technology, I started with that. It's everything that is shifting. It feels like sinking sand or the sand that you stand in and you just feel off balance because something else comes. And somebody else comes up with the next technology and you're off on the balance again. But it's not going away. And embracing that level of discomfort or stress. For me, I look at it as a brain stretch. It's every opportunity to grow and to look at something different. And it probably is not all going to work the way I vision it. Fail quickly. Pick yourself up. None of this is life-threatening, really. Brush it off and carry on to the next platform. Looking aspirationally at near real time. I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to get to real time. I really think that we need to have a focus in the staircase of how we're working and what we're doing. I have also I volunteer for a number of organizations. One of them is the Human Resource Certification Institute. And I'm really honored that they bring in thought leaders. And I'm going to say I'm a groupie to this gentleman. His name is Franz Gilbert. At the time I met him, he was working for Korn Ferry. He now is on the Deloitte team. And he comes into our meetings regularly with a view as a futurist and where it was going from the HR perspective. How many of you currently work with robots? I stay in a hotel we have people in it, but there's robots. How many of you have an electric vehicle? I have an electric vehicle. How many of us are embracing some of these things? And they went through the artificial intelligence and how it will impact the jobs, how it will impact how many employees we have. So if I come back to the electric vehicle, think about all the combustion engines and how that will change if we change to that. How many jobs will there be? Companies are embracing it. It is fearless. It is fearful. But we need to be moving ourselves forward in all of those areas. So from an Asia perspective, there's a lot that's going on. We have a long history of ways of doing things. But at the same time, I would say what we're seeing, we're in the infancy on relocation by comparison to North America and to Europe. And it's really learning from our friends and peers overseas and also bringing forward some differentiators as we go forward. So I'll pass back.
Okay, that was a fantastic overview. Thank you so much. And I think the combination of speakers and their perceptions of the trends that they're seeing and how they're responding to these, and I include our earlier speakers as well, has has made this, the two sessions fascinating for me, and I'm sure for you too. We've got time for some questions, so can you raise your hand if you'd like to pose a question to any member of the panel, please? And it seems as if we've got one coming. This is a very difficult member of Jura.
That really was fascinating. Thank you very much. I think the whole morning has been extraordinary and really, really insightful. Adrian, I think the picking up on the aging demographic in the UK was really, really a differentiator. I didn't know you were doing that. Can you just elaborate a little more about what the kind of support is that's actually available and how you market that?
Okay. So the bridge fast element has been going for about 15 years. So we've been into it for some considerable time. We are one of the originators, I guess, on the guaranteed sales price scheme, which some of you know as home sale. And we decided to transfer that into the elder care part as well. Often you'll find that parents and children no longer live in proximity, and that's a real problem for them, and they need to sell the house. We have situations where the parent usually is unwell and in hospital. Their only asset is the property because of the way that particular thing works in the UK. And so they need to get access to the equity in that property very quickly. Now, this is not equity release, which has bad press. This is about securing a loan just in the same way as you would do with a GSP against the asset that is the property. And from that, then you can invite them to speak with the Society of Later Life Advisors, who are lawyers who are focused and financiers who are focused on later life people. And as a consequence of that, they then can buy an annuity to pay for the nursing home fees or the residential fees. And from that, we've been talking to organisations, corporates, about having that ability available for their employees. So that's another way of talking to the HRDs that are in there. It's great in many respects, but a lot of the corporates don't have a lot of money, don't necessarily see it as a perk in the way they should do. So it's been a very slow burn, without a doubt. I suspect that it's going to pick up because of the demographic and the way that we're seeing that age. And we have that experience and built up that knowledge to be able to deal with it. And the time for care bit is actually the corporate element of that. And that's building a website and pulling together some expertise. And we have a DSP who's an expert in residential accommodation, nursing homes. And that's what they do. And they've got practice nurses which know exactly what to do in terms of the analysis of the person who's going to be going into that home, and then they go with them to find those homes. So that's an analysis that was done, and that's the result of that analysis.
And if I could piggyback on, I was neglectful I wrote myself a note about the elder care point, because in Asia, again, when you look at cost of living in some of the countries as well as the cost of manpower, a couple of our countries in Asia have, we'll say, medical relocation, that if you look at Thailand in terms of choosing to go and have a medical, if you're looking in the Americas or certain other countries where it's extraordinarily high, that is an area where there's a visa status of being able to go in, but also looking at permanent residency changes, whether it's an attractiveness for seniors of how much their dollar can buy, but also in that duty of care and the care of nurses, that you're finding retirement communities being set up for multiple nationalities in both Thailand and Kuala Lumpur of Malaysia. And it's an interesting segment. We haven't chosen to position ourselves in terms of driving that sector of business, but we've also been able to provide that as a solution to some of our corporate clients, because as a transferee is moving, and you've got the gender sandwich challenge, if you've got your children that you're taking on the relocation, but you've also got your parents, some of them are choosing to also relocate their parents, and it's going into one of those markets that may be closer to where they may be in Asia, but not in the exact same country. But a number of the European countries in particular, that they're choosing to retire into those countries. They can purchase property, they can have their visa status, that they're basically a permanent resident, but they're also choosing to go into a housing community that is that senior community. So we're seeing alternatives coming up around the globe.
Yeah, we're also seeing the opportunity working with short-term assignees. Would you believe they're having to leave elderly parents behind and they can't afford to, then that gives us an opportunity then to be able to step in and provide that emergency assistance that they might need with the expertise to be able to back it up. And so it's another service, and it goes back to where Bill Grable and Bob were talking earlier this morning, in just trying to do different things in different ways to make sure you're providing, fulfilling a need. And in this instance, the aging demographic allows us to be able to do that.
Yeah, the expressions that have come up before, pain points and unmet needs, again, it links so well into that and that changing demographic. Are there any other questions? No? Well, in that case, we've actually finished on time. So firstly, thank you to the panel. That really was fascinating.
Fabulous. It really was. Oh,
Good,
God.
thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining in. Thank you.
Very interesting.